Like this is like my third show and then a pre-record. And I think I laughed so hard. I thought, you know what I might have done in my pants right there. Just saying. You know, it's interesting. I'm Dr. Pat. I'm here at Mark Anthony, and we have a very special guest today. Colonel Dr. Diane Corcoran joining us here today. I say Corcoran because I don't know. I'm from the East Coast. I have to have her correct me
correct.
if I got it right.
You got it right.
Ooh, yeah. Oh my gosh. But so since Mark, I met you, like I used to think NDEs was a naturopathic treatment. Just saying. I mean, think about it. Think about it. NDE. So yeah. I thought, like, and this is a bunch of years ago. I thought, oh, so we're going to talk about extreme naturopathology. No, it's near-death experiences. Yes. And you know what? I've had the honor and the pleasure of talking to so many people over the years about this, especially when we're talking about our military. So many stories. But we have a special guest, Mark. Why don't you tell us who we have?
We do. We are honored tonight for our special Veterans Day episode to have Colonel Dr. Diane Corcoran. And she has the distinction of holding both a master's degree and a PhD. Now, Dr. Corcoran served in the Army Nurse Corps for 25 years, starting in Vietnam and ending up as chief administrator in the Frankfurt Army Medical Center during Operation Desert Storm. She was the first nurse to officially command a hospital. Kudos. Now retired from the military, she's busier than ever, and she serves as a healthcare consultant, specializing in the healthcare and support for people who have had near-death experiences, NDEs, particularly service members who've had an NDE during combat. For over 40 years, Diane has lectured worldwide on the importance of healthcare professionals understanding the near-death experience. She has lectured on the implications of NDEs for the military, nursing, and other issues such as support and care for terminally ill patients, bereavement, sudden infant death syndrome, and other issues related to death and dying. Colonel Corcoran has published several articles, and she's appeared on many radio and TV interviews. Dr. Corcoran has been the president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANS, several times over the course of the last 40 years, and she's currently serving on the board of directors of IANS. So welcome to the Psychic in the Doc, Colonel Dr. Diane Corcoran.
Yeah.
So happy to be here.
Yeah. Who says science and spirituality don't mix? Come on.
They do. They do.
So Diane, and is it okay? I always want to call you Colonel Corcoran or Dr.
Call me
Corcoran.
Diane. That's
All right,
fine.
Diane. My dad was a Navy SEAL, and he taught me, you respect the military. And it's interesting because somebody on Facebook today, I was promoting this show, and they wrote, and it was in an NDE group on Facebook, and they wrote, oh, well, should you really be talking about that since so many people in the military have sent people to the afterlife? And my response was,
oh, that's a good, I never heard that one before, Mark.
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
a good one.
Yeah, so I sent a picture I have of two soldiers in dress blues devastated at a graveside. And the caption was, the reason you never received a bill for your freedom is because somebody has already paid the price. And I noticed her comment disappeared within 5 minutes. So, when people talk about the military, the war, it's like no one should ever lecture military personnel about the price of what it means to put yourself in harm's way. So I'm sorry, I just had to say that because I have very, very strong feelings about showing respect, being raised by a veteran and one who showed me that, courage isn't lack of fear, it's doing it even though you're afraid.
Okay. Yes, it's interesting because, if people only saw some of these young soldiers, I was a brand new nurse when I went to Vietnam and took care of many, many 18-year-olds. They were frightened to death. And they would say to me, you shouldn't be here. You could get hurt. I mean, they were afraid. They're afraid for us. They're not trying to kill anybody except in, what their mission is, what they're trying to survive. If you just saw them, you'd know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And those of us, Colonel, those of us that go back to the Vietnam War, and, I have been on many sides of the Vietnam War. I mean, I can go back to my young days from when I was 17 and I tried to join the Air Force. And it's like, that was not going to work. And I've shared this before. My dad was supposed to sign and he said, oh, so this is how little my dad knew about women in the military back then, right? My dad's like, oh no, I'm not signing anything that gives her a gun or puts her close to ammunition. That's not going to happen. But, it was an interesting time for us. It was a time of pain. It was a time of sorrow. It was a time of loss. But what hurt me even more than any of that, regardless of how I felt, was how we treated our soldiers when they came back from that war. And so much loss. I can only imagine what you saw.
Oh, yes. And it's interesting because it's the issues still go on. I was sitting in the clinic the other day and overheard a supply person and another person really bad-mouthing Jane Fonda and what does she know and all this. And I said, were you there?
Right, exactly.
You have any idea what she was talking about, what she was concerned with? I said, you really shouldn't talk about things you don't know. And of course, that conversation then stopped right away. But none of us, I mean, I was surprised as anybody arriving. And I remember going, I was the only woman on a flight of about 400 young men going to Vietnam. And you arrive there and, it's like you're in the middle of a room with a bulb hanging down and you hear all these bombs and I'm going, what in the world was I thinking? I didn't volunteer, but many of us went from my basic group. And it's frightening for everybody. And I had no idea a single body could take such torment and still be alive. I, took care of a lot of triple amputees and just, oh my goodness, you just can't believe it sometimes.
Let me ask you this question, because this is an assumption I've made for a really long time. I don't know if it's true, Mark. Maybe both of you can chime in. My assumption was that if you ever want to account for people that have near-death experiences, get close to the war front, get close to the front lines, because thanks to the work that you did, you brought so many of those people back. I mean, we don't talk about that enough, right?
Right. And it's interesting because we now have research that was done by a Dr. David Hufford in the VA that did work with veterans, combat veterans. And we know 50% or 48 plus 0.9 or something, 50% of combat veterans have had NDEs. Yeah. That is a lot of people.
That's what I was saying. But why don't we talk about that more?
And we do nothing about it. That's been my concern. The VA's not prepared for it.
Yeah.
There isn't, I actually have a friend, another friend beside Mark, who's a medium. And years ago, I was doing a paper on veterans and wanting to know something. I said, I need for you to reach out to the other side, because there's not a lot of people I could say that to, and talk to some veterans, because it's my assumption that on top of PTSD and physical injuries, people have, and the combat vets have NDEs, have nowhere to go. Nobody talks to them. They have no idea that they're not crazy. And I want to find out from these veterans who committed suicide, whether it had an issue. And indeed it did.
Yeah.
And Diane, back during the Vietnam era, they didn't even have the term NDE, near-death experience of that term. And so I'm assuming that in your capacity as a nurse, as a healthcare provider, you were hearing these stories. So how did you first get interested in near-death experience?
In Vietnam, brand new nurse, middle of the night, a young man says, can you come here? I need to tell you something. And he said, but you have to promise me you will believe me. And I go over to talk to him, young guy. He'd already been to surgery, so he was recovering. He had tears rolling down his cheek. And I said, I'll believe you. And he starts to tell me how when he was shot, his spirit came out of his body. He could see the rest of the spirits of the men who were with him, who were shot, and he knew who was going to die and live. Then he zoomed up and went to another world, and he starts describing all this. And of course, it's 1969. I have no idea what he's talking about. And then he said, and then I just crashed back in my body when they threw me on the helicopter.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, what is this? And I said the most positive things I could about, I think this must be a gift. It's perfectly normal. It's okay. You're going to be okay. But it really was like a vaccination for me, because then my thinking was, no patient should ever have to come back and wonder and tell somebody about an NDE and not have somebody supportive there. So that's when I started teaching healthcare professionals and all kinds of trying to get the healthcare community, which we're still trying to do, to be knowledgeable and help. Because the VA doesn't really support it. They throw them into PTSD groups or give them psychotropic drugs, which just make it worse.
Yeah.
And it's sad, because it's a simple fix, and I have volunteered. I'll come lecture, I'll be a consultant, I'll talk to the patients. We have to support these people. And
Yeah,
it's just,
I saw that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but when I was practicing law full time, a lot of my practice was personal injury, and I had a lot of vets. And what I saw when they went to the VA is what they needed was talk therapy.
right.
And what I saw, and Dr. Pat, you understand the importance of talk therapy. All I saw was medication. I had one client that kept getting arrested, and it'd take like 5 or 6 cops to subdue him. This guy was, he was special forces. And so I was going over his medical records, and I saw 2 different types of sleeping pills, 2 different types of mood stabilizers. I saw like 7 different medications for sleeping and controlling his moods. And I said, well, how many doctors do you have? He had like 5 different doctors at the VA. None of them were talking to each other. It took me forever to get hold of the VA. And when I finally got hold of one of his doctors that said he's on all these medications, the doctor said, oh, dear God, no wonder he's throwing these violent fits. So we arranged it where he got 1 sleeping pill, 1 painkiller, 1 mood stabilizer, instead of 7 different medications, because he was having these psychotic breaks.
Right.
And the VA and the medical profession in general needs to start realizing, or no, they have to realize that near-death experiences are for real. So how did you first broach the subject? Were you active duty when you first broached the subject of near-death experiences?
I was, and they all thought I was crazy, because I was adamant then that we have to teach people about NDE. So this is way back when there wasn't 1 book, there wasn't 1 movie, there wasn't 1 anything. And I started giving workshops. I'm not sure what I was thinking at the time, but I have always taken the philosophy, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm going to tell you about what happens to these soldiers. And it's your responsibility to just listen. You don't have to try to fix it. You don't have to, God forbid, don't give them medication unless, of course, they actually need something. And so and literally people called me the death and dying lady. And the higher rank I got, the more influence I took, and would teach it. When Desert Storm, I had a whole lecture laid out in Frankfurt, and we were going to teach all 1,000 nurses and doctors in Corpsman about NDEs, because, I know that lots of these people are going to have it. And it's been kind of, the culmination is the recent article that Lilia and I wrote that was in John Hopkins' The Voice, the narrative of ethics. And we had an ethicist, a clergy, all writing articles to say it is not ethical to not treat these patients.
You know what I was excited about? I was excited about the fact that the Social Work Today magazine, or the arm of Social Work Today, actually had an article in there about veterans and transpersonal experience, and you're named in that article. But the reason I was excited about it is because there are many people that are both nurses and social workers who have counseling degrees.
Right.
And these are people in the social work arena that don't want to fall into the psychology arena and have to just fill out paperwork and diagnosis. And so I was excited to see that article and to see your quote in it, because it included both near-death experiences, transpersonal experiences, and it went back and cited stories from World War II. And I think this has got to be part of getting rid of the stigma. See, there's a stigma around this that goes back to every war, isn't there? Or every instance with a vet.
They called it many different things. I mean, if you go back to the early religious literature, there are obviously in philosophers signs of it.
Yeah.
But what is amazing, I one time did a lecture with a psychiatrist. We went down to Fort Carson and gave a lecture to all mental health people on the whole base. And I always start out by saying, how many of you know what an NDE is? How many of you are near-death experiencers? Because over the years, I can guarantee you 10% of any audience, whether it's 10 or 10 million, of those people will be experiences. 4 people raised their hand out of about 100 people.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't know. I gave a lecture in San Antonio to Army psychologists. And, you know, characteristics, after effects, all that. And the psychologist said to me, she was really furious. She said, how could I have gone through all this training and never heard about this?
Wow.
So and I went to the VA.
I can answer that question.
Yeah, Dr. Pat did.
That she had no idea. And I said, it's simple, just listen to them. Here's some books, you know. Now, of course, now there's so much material out there.
Yeah, there's so much material, but I will say this, there's not enough research. And I love this guy that put that article up, you know, this guy, I shouldn't call him this guy. I love this professional, Jay Scott, Janison, man or woman, not sure, doesn't matter. But I love what this person is doing now, because there's a thread of a bunch of things with their name on it that has to do with research, right? See, I don't know why it is we just can't believe people.
Well,
we just can't believe people.
Always in it.
We
Did
gotta
you know
have,
that Bigelow just put $2 million out for an essay contest on being able to research and prove the afterlife. He gave away $500,000 to one, and you know, there's like 30 of them. A couple people from Mayans got them, which is wonderful. Here's research, you know, somebody paying for it, because that's the biggest problem. You can't get money for it.
You can't get money for it. And what I love about what you're doing and the conversation you're bringing to the forefront is not only do we have to have a conversation, but there's an aftermath. You know, it's like we talk about near-death experience like some kind of television series that you watch and then it's over.
Yeah.
But now
never over.
But isn't this research really to talk about these are the experience, but wait a minute. These are the clinical effects of it. What about lack of trust? What about stress? What about alcoholism? What about?
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that this research you mentioned, just like the article I read about combat stress, it's not an article that says combat stress in war. The articles are now taking a little roadmap, right? It's like the road runner, and it's taking like the little road runner, and it's hopping over here and it's saying NDE.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, 50 years I've been doing this now, and finally you start seeing it, but we still have a long road to hoe in the medical community to get them to just listen. Clergy's also to just listen to these patients, people, because the majority of these experiences don't happen in the hospital. So many times they go to their priest or their a friend, and all they need is somebody to say, you're okay, that was real,
well,
and give them some resources. Yeah,
I am so relating to everything on this, because I have to put up with this constantly as a medium. Oh, you can't do that, you're making it up. Or it's not real. All right, having had an NDE, and like Dr. Pat said, you have an NDE, it's like, okay, show's over. It's like, no, that's really the beginning of your journey. And like what Diane, you said, is it's a lifetime. Like I think it was like 2 or 3 IANS conferences ago, the theme of the conference was the after effects
and they're
of
significant.
NDEs. Yeah, they are.
And think about children who have these, soldiers and children have the least advocates. So I've always really tried to support children also, because they try to tell their parents one time, parents say, don't make up stuff, and that's it. They're not
Yeah.
talking about it anymore. And I have a nephew who's an experiencer, and fortunately, I recognized it very early when he was about 18 months old. And I mean, they are very different children. And if you don't kind of guide them and listen to them, and they're going to talk about the light beings and God talked to them and all these things that, you know, are going to go on for a long time. And some of the after effects are really significant. And that's why 50% of the married folks end up being divorced if they don't have a supportive spouse.
Right.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's such a life-changing event. You know, you come out of this and, you know, people think, oh, you went into the light and it's all groovy and you come out like everything's granola. And it's like, I mean, and I like granola, but it doesn't turn your life into the Republic of Kumbaya.
No.
And you try to explain this to you. And I, you know, I remember when I went public with being a medium, one of my mentors in the UK said, Mark, she goes, Mark, you're going to lose all of your friends.
Yeah.
But you'll make new friends. And here I am on this show. Okay. And you know what? I'm doing a lot better now. And what I mean by that is we're all on different phases in our spiritual journey. But when we're dealing with, I mean, the military is like the ultimate epitome of bureaucracy. And the military, like the legal profession, like the medical profession, is always behind the times. You know, I mean, social changes, by the time you get a statute to be in conformity with it, it takes years. And the medical profession, we've had 50 plus years of survival of consciousness studies. And a lot of doctors say, oh, it's just dimethyltryptamine produced by a dying brain, or it's a grief-induced hallucination, blah, blah, blah. We've heard it all. And we can refute it all with science. And yet still, there is no treatment for people that are suffering from, or I don't know if I want to say suffering, coping with the after effects of this massive metaphysical experience.
No, they're actually suffering. I mean, when you put the research together, Mark, that we talked about, and let's take a short break and come back and talk about this. You know, the problem is we're not talking about the fact that they're suffering. We're not talking about the fact that they're suicidal. We're not talking about the fact that when you take their blood pressure, it's through the roof. And maybe people are saying, oh, they're having post-traumatic stress disorder of being bombed. Well, maybe that's true. But what if we were to open up the equation a little bit? Let's take a short break. When we come back, Dr. Diane Corcoran is joining us here today. Fellow New Yorker, if I must say. Nurse Corps for 25 years, Chief Administrator, Frankfurt Army Medical Center, Desert Storm, which we haven't talked about yet. The story's coming out of there. But when you think about what you've done and what you've served and how you've served, Commander, 86th Combat Support Hospital, we can go on. You had to make a bold move to come forward. So you had to make what I call the B move. You had to do something, because see all of that stuff you had, that career. What do you think it's like when you're Dr. Diane and you have all of that and you decide, I am going to be an advocate. I'm going to be an international expert on near-death experience. We'll hear what that story's about when we come back from break.
Wow. Thank you, Jessica, for this is Veterans Day, special episode. And I'm Mark Anthony, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Dr. Pat Basili. We are the psychic in the doc. And our guest today is Colonel Dr. Diane Corcoran, who's done just about everything you can do in the medical field and in the field of near-death experience research. And we'll be taking calls. If anyone wants to talk about their NDE or ask a question about near-death experiences, the number is 1-800-930-2819. That's 1-800-930-2819. Because maybe you have had a near-death experience, but have been afraid to talk about it, or need to talk about it with people who understand. And we are the NDE Dream Team. So Diane, Desert Storm. Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us about your
Yeah.
experiences with
And
that.
by the way, how do we find out about you? Because people can Google you. I Googled you, but you got a
Yeah.
great website too.
Right. Yeah.
Can we get
So
people
my
over
website has a lot of information on
there?
it.
Okay.
And I also do a monthly show on ISCO, which is an IAN's online status once a month for veterans.
Oh.
So that's also a way to get in
Okay.
touch with me.
So it's
Um,
Corcoran Consulting-NDE.com, right?
Right.
Corcoran Consulting-NDE.com. All right. Sorry, Mark.
No, that's quite all
Desert
right.
Storm.
Desert
Desert
Storm.
Storm. Well, I was chief at Frankfurt at the time, we had about a 300-bed hospital, normal, pediatrics, neonates, all kinds of, and we had about 1,500 employees, and we get orders that we have to gear up and we have to come up to 1,000 beds and get rid of all the pediatrics and everything else and just be prepared for combat injuries. And then on top of that, we're going to bring in a general hospital from the reserves from Madison, Wisconsin, 400 reservists who have never been activated before, 3 days before Christmas. So mothers left 5 kids at home, you know, I mean, all kinds of crazy issues. And trying to make 1,000 beds, I ordered and told the nurses, you know, this is going to be different. We're going back old school. I ordered 1,000 litters and 1,000 IV poles and said, we're going to learn how to do this with a piece of tape. You're not going to have machines and people are going to roll in here by the hundreds any way they can get here. And sure enough, because the hospitals were not really set up in the desert, we had 60 patients a day coming into Frankfurt. All kinds of problems with the reservists because they sent patients who were on Haldol, you know, who had stomach issues and were eating MREs and were sick. We had all kinds of accidents and issues. So it was an incredible stressing time. And we had to I set up a thing because they saw things they have never seen in their life. A young medic, I remember, saw her friend decapitated. And I said, we have to have a stress ward for people who are just need to have special care. So it was, fortunately, it didn't go on but maybe 3 months beforehand, we started getting these patients as they were mobilizing them to the desert. So it was an incredible feat to go from 300 beds to 1,000 over a weekend.
Wow.
Over a weekend. I said, I really should have written this up because it was really a strategic plan and really an incredible feat. And there was only one other nurse and myself who had ever seen combat. So we're saying, look, things are going to be different. You have to do things differently. And we need to be prepared. So it was a lot of teaching, a lot of young nurses, even the doctors. The commander had never seen anything. He didn't have a clue most of the time about what was going on. And so it was an incredible time. And fortunately, as I say, it didn't go on forever and ever. But it was my 1,000 litters and my 1,000 IV poles went to the Russians. So since we didn't use them, but lots and lots of really difficult things for these young people that came from this reserve hospital 3 days before Christmas, if you can imagine. And they're in a strange city, you know, and most of the nurses had been nurses, but a lot of the medics had been mechanics,
Yeah.
other kinds of things, and really had never been medics. So a lot of training, a lot of difficult things. But as always, you know, if you have a good team and you take it with a positive attitude, it works out. But it was interesting.
Did you see a number of NDEs with a Desert Storm personnel?
Well, with a few, but they weren't there long enough to get a chance to talk to them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we did have the same problem we had in Vietnam. Most of the air evac system comes from the reserves, and they could not get people out of there. The unfortunate thing is, in Germany, parents can get on a plane and come to the hospital, whether they're invited or not. And so we had a big media issue because all these young kids, their parents, they call them, say, I'm in Germany, and their parents came. And so it, you know, it kind of complicates. And then we're trying to get them out of there to send them home.
So since you've retired from the military, have you, and I know that you're still working with veterans, obviously, have you found some segments of the military being more receptive to your work with near-death experiences?
You know, individuals, nurses are very receptive. If you teach them, if you talk to them, they get it and they will pay attention. Doctors, not so much. Social workers, if you, once again, if you teach them about it, you know, they're pretty receptive. So the sad thing is I have lectured at all the services, major conferences and hospitals, and they're all excited and they're enthusiastic about it. But what we need is a overriding, we need to get the Surgeon General, who has had an NDE, to put some language and policies in place in the military hospitals. It needs to not be so fragmented. So it's disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, when we're seeing people like Dr. Bruce Grayson and Dr. Kenneth Ring and of course, Dr. Raymond Moody and Dr. Diane Corcoran writing articles that are published in medical journals about near-death experiences. I mean, you know, within the span of 50 years, this has gone from, you know, fringe element to being, as it should be, taken very seriously by large segments of the medical community. You would think that the VA, that the military would start realizing this is a real phenomenon. And my theory is, you know, and I had an NDE when I was a child. I was 4 years old when I had my NDE, but I was fortunate because both my father and then later on my mother had NDE. So it was not, you know, treated as a weird thing. They kind of got it, not kind of got it, but they did get it. But I'm just wondering, is it fear of an NDE? Is it the spiritual and potentially religious implications? What is the resistance?
I think it's part of the education system. The older docs believe whatever they were taught, and it almost doesn't matter what you tell them after that. The younger docs are certainly more into spirituality. They're more liberal to look at different issues, and they're much more receptive. So I think it's going to take another 20, 30 years, I guess, which is sad. What I don't understand is the fix is simple. Not going to cost a lot of money, not going to, you know, I offer myself up for free. We could fix this and do training across the services. There are many easy ways to fix it, but they just don't get it. We brought in the Surgeon General, took her to a conference. She said, yes, this is all important, but nobody's going to listen to me.
And you know what you're pointing to? Okay, so you're pointing to an issue which is very big. And it's an issue that, you know, when I first started this show, I had a vet work for me, right? She had served. And I got to understand about the new wars, right? The new landscape from a woman, right? So I brought in Congressman Jim McDermott out here, and he brought the head of the Vet Association out here in Western Washington. And we had this conversation about the stigma around getting our vets the relief they need to get some peace of mind and peace of heart, better known as mental health. If we just call it peace of mind and not mental health, maybe people would, but you see the process as I understood it, and this interview with McDermott was fascinating. He basically said it was one of the best interviews he's ever had. It's because I knew nothing about this except people are in pain. I just don't understand even to this day, why can't we change something in the system so that men and women, husbands and wives, children of vets are not stigmatized to get help?
It seems to me, my latest thought is find a hospital for me, any service, and let's use it as a pilot program. And I'll go in and teach, train the trainers, do all this, serve as a consultant, and let's see if we could make a difference in the outcomes of patients who have NDEs. Now, what most doctors will say, I shared a keynote with DeBakey one time, and I said, your patients are having these all the time. He said,
Yeah.
oh no, none of my patients have these. And I said, oh really? You're stopping their heart, but none of your patients have NDEs. And that's the part of the problem, is I don't think they see it as a real need and don't understand the suffering that is going on because of it. And we could do a great job, and maybe if one hospital really worked out well, then somebody else would be willing to take it up in another hospital. I don't know. I mean, I've been waiting for the right thing to happen.
Well, I'll tell you what is happening, but I don't think this is going to work. But this is what's happening. You know, I have a friend, his name is David Essel, and David just decided, I can't take it anymore. He says, I can't. And he says, he talks about stress. I had him on the show. He said, I'm going to create my own centers to help vets. Because this is what happened a number of years ago when I was talking to McDermott. And I said, you know what? I got people here that are calling into the show. They're creating healing circles for vets. So this is the thing that I think is hopeful. If we could just pull away from the real problem and go to the place where independent people like you, Dr. Corcoran, people like you, people like David are saying, I've got to do something. You see what I'm saying? I've got to do something. Maybe if there's enough of a groundswell, maybe somehow we might be able to get attention, right?
One of the gals, Lilia, who's worked with me for several years now, just with veterans, she has sent thousands of emails overseas, hospitals, all kinds of places to try to get them to understand the importance. Mm-hmm. And of course, I do the same thing in articles and lecturing. And yes, I hope that the light's going to come on one of these days, because the fix is so simple. They have all these other problems that are expensive, they're difficult, the bureaucracy. No, you don't need any of that.
This is talking. Yeah, this is getting a group of people in a room and talking.
And you should connect with David. I'll connect you with David.
Find me a chair in a room and we'll...
Exactly. And see, you can help him because he's taking it from people are in pain. You're bringing, oh, this is maybe why they're in pain. How many people are you bringing together, David, that have this, that feel invisible?
You know, the hardest part about being an NDEer is when the social stigma, people look at you like you're an alien. and that's what I love when I'm at IANS. It's like we're all there, and we can sit there and talk about, okay, I saw these light beings and I think they're angels, and other people, well, I saw Jesus, and and they're talking about this, and we're the norm in that microcosm. And that's exactly what these groups, people, because military especially, these guys, these women, they're tough, they're professionals, and they don't want to be perceived as weak by opening up their hearts, their feelings. But when you have a major metaphysical, a major spiritual experience, where your consciousness leaves your physical body and transcends to, the afterlife frequency, and you don't have a safe refuge to talk to anyone about, then there's that us versus them syndrome. So thank you, Diane, for doing this. We have to keep at it. We have to keep at it. I mean, look at IANS. It went from a couple intellectuals at the Division of Perceptual Studies at UVA 50 years ago to now this thing. And thank goodness for Dr. Jeffrey Long founding the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, because he has a database of people from worldwide. And what we're seeing, it's not just people in Western countries. There's an Iranian branch of IANS. Right. We get reports from South Korea, from all over Asia, South America. This is not an isolated thing that only happens to white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. This happens to everybody.
The other group of people that we shouldn't forget, and I'm one of those, I also had an NDE when I was 4, had my tonsils out, almost bled to death, but I have no memory of it, no memory
exactly
of an experience. And many people, and especially children, have that happen. The only way I figured it out was years later, I just thought everybody behaved the way I did. I had a lot of intuitive skills. I had, didn't like violence much, all these things. And I thought, well, everybody's like that. Well, no, not everybody is like that. Yeah. And it was actually PMH Atwater who said to me, you're a near-death experiencer, don't you know that? And I go, well, yeah, there's a good explanation for it. Yeah. But because I didn't remember it, there are a lot of adults out there who don't remember it, but they know they're different.
Yeah. Enormously understated. I blacked out and I ended up in an emergency vehicle, taken to the hospital. And they got all sorts of science names for what happens. Don't remember, don't understand how anything happened. But when I came back, I changed my whole perspective. I wasn't going to be a high-paid consultant. I wasn't going to do, honestly, when everything changed. Everybody thought I just lost it. And I went on for years thinking I lost it. And so these are people, whether that happened to me or not, but these numbers of people, they are truly invisible. So they're the INDEs.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good idea. And the fact I used to have people call me all the time. I had a very noted potato chip country guy whose family thought he was crazy because he had an NDE and he was on the stock market and doing all this stuff. Now he wants to go to the beach and write poetry. And his wife is like, wait a minute, I like my 3 cars and he's not having it. And she calls me and what's the matter with him? Is he crazy? And, I said, not unless he was crazy before. He's just had a change in philosophy, in feelings, in morals, in everything. And he's never going to be what he was before.
And it could be subtle. It could be sometimes subtle. For me, it was more like I spent 10 years in a doctoral program. I spent $100,000 in it.
Oh
And
my God.
and I come out of the doctoral program. I'm supposed to get a big consulting job, and I dial a wrong phone number, and I spend buying airtime on a show. I'm not kidding. And people in relationship with you are like,
Oh yeah.
I did not sign up for this. See, this is the part of the story. If we don't get medical help, maybe we can help people how to handle just even that, Dr. Corcoran, right?
Yeah. It's like Al-Anon. We need we need an organization for spouses who were trying to help support the experiencers, because it's a family issue.
Yeah.
It's not just the experiencer. And I've had people walk into the office when I was president. I used to be at the office more. And a young engineer walked in. He'd had an NDE 6 months ago. He was at the VA. They put him on psychotropic drugs. He said, I can't work. I can't think. I can't. And I said, and he told me his experience. And I said, well, do you have other issues? No. And he said, I just tried to tell him about my experience. And so often they're rejected by the doctors, the clergy. Then they feel twice as bad because they've been rejected again. As one guy said, I got thrown out of heaven, and then I got thrown out of my church because and it's very, very sad. And it just mystifies me why we have such an easy fix, and we can't get a hospital or a clinic or somebody to institute, a program. It'd be easy to write it.
Diane, you are the pebble that is starting the avalanche of change. And I want to thank you on behalf of Dr. Pat, myself, for being such an amazing guest. I mean, an hour's gone by. I feel like we're just getting warmed up here.
Right.
So you're going to have to come back. All right.
We have to bring her back with David. We have to get David Essel, who just is like, I have had enough. We have to why don't we do a panel like this, Mark, and get them back?
Absolutely. We absolutely should, because, people need to know this. And so Diane, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And
really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And give us your website again.
Corcoran Consulting-NDE.com.
Fantastic. And everybody, Dr. Pat and I will be back next week. And for everybody, honor our fallen. This is Veterans Day. And like I said at the beginning of the show, you never got a bill for your freedom because somebody, meaning a veteran, already paid for it. Many blessings. Have an honorable
everybody
Veterans Day.
For their service.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Duty.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jessica. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning into The Psychic and the Doc with Mark Anthony and me, Dr. Pat Basile, right here on TransformationTalkRadio.com. Hey, look, come back next week so we can explore with you more of life's many challenges and learn from fascinating guests. And you know what? Even Mark and me. We'll connect you and discover insights from people in this life and from the afterlife. Extraordinary problems? Yeah, they do. They require extraordinary solutions. But step into the world of possibilities with us on The Psychic and the Doc. That's every Thursday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, right here on TransformationTalkRadio.com. That's TransformationTalkRadio.com. And don't forget, we're also live face-to-face on Facebook.com, Transformation Talk Radio.